So Kawhi Leonard got traded for Demar Derozan. Danny Green, Jakob Poeltl, and a first-round pick also involved in this trade. This video is going to be for the Raptors. I'll do another video in a couple hours for the Spurs and their perspective and all this. So for Toronto, this is clearly a risk where the high end is you have one of the best players in the NBA, and the low end is you traded away a very good player in DeMar DeRozan for a guy who left you in one season, and Jakob Poeltl, who seems like a promising young big man. But I think there's a whole lot of in-between with all this that we can dive into. So, with Toronto, you are in this weird position where you could argue that they were maybe the third, second, or perhaps even best team in the Eastern Conference, given that the demons of LeBron James were finally gone, right? I think the Raptors were a better team than Cleveland, but of course, for whatever reason, when LeBron shows up, the Raptors, they get scared and then some. So there was a chance that mental block just wasn't going to be there, and then from a strict basketball standpoint, I think you could argue that the Celtics and Philly were better, but I don't think it was a foregone conclusion that the Raptors were suddenly the third best team in the East, right? So you could have just ran it back with DeRozan. You hope that Anunoby and Siakam and these guys just get a year better and the bench mob is still there, and you could just be really good, right? And you hope that Nick Nurse can just do his thing as a head coach, where he was mainly the reason why they started moving the ball around more often. I mean, sure, Dwayne Casey okayed it, but Nick Nurse was the guy who kind of put the blueprint in there, if you will. But now you're just going for the fences if you're Masai Ujiri, right? You are saying we are okay with trading away a guarantee of being really good and maybe making the conference finals, maybe making the NBA finals, to if Kawhi Leonard is healthy, if he is 100% committed to Toronto, which, I mean, as of right now, it doesn't seem like that's the case, but you're going to give him the Paul George treatment here, then you give yourself a real chance at being the best team in the East, right? Because, lest we forget, Kawhi Leonard, MVP candidate, drastic improvement over DeMar DeRozan on both sides of the floor, and that's a special player. I mean, that's the best player in the Eastern Conference. That is a guy who you could put on Kyrie Irving or Ben Simmons, and you can be really successful there, right? And then if it goes really well and he actually wants to stay, then that's great, because now you got that for multiple years. But of course, if he leaves, then I think Toronto's put in an awkward position where now it becomes, do you go into a full-on rebuild? Well, the one thing that the Raptors have that I think makes this a little easier is they have an assortment of pretty good young players, right? With OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet. They had Jakob Poeltl before this move, and sure, none of those guys seem like they're going to be like top-tier NBA players, but they all seem like they could be pretty damn good. DeLon Wright potentially being another one. He's a little bit older. So I think that just makes this like 5% easier, and you could argue that going into a rebuild is not a horrible thing for the Raptors, given that Lowry is about to be, 32 years old, I'm pretty sure, and DeRozan was in his late 20s, and you could argue that if they kept everything the same, Lowry would have declined, and then DeRozan would have been in a position to be an unrestricted free agent, and the team would have already been like a 45-win team because of Lowry's decline, so then he was going to bounce. Now, DeRozan loved Toronto, okay? He didn't take any meetings with any other teams. He was all in on turning the Raptors around, and to his credit, he mainly did that outside of some playoff disappointments, especially this previous round against the Cavs, where Lowry, outside of that Game 4, was pretty damn good, and DeRozan just kind of stunk up the joint for most of that series. But, he did a decent enough job in Toronto, and maybe he would have actually stayed even if the team wasn't that good, kind of like KG with the T-Wolves. But you could then argue again, even if he would have chosen to stay, at that point you're dealing with, 30-year-old Demar Derozan on a 45-win team? That doesn't really sound that amazing, right? Now, of course, to go back to those young players, maybe with DeRozan still there and those guys improving, you could end up being a little bit better than that. I don't know, but I can understand why the front office would say to themselves, let's just go all or nothing. Let's be a title contender, or let's get ourselves on the track to being, in a full-on rebuild. I can see the rationale in either one for Toronto. So I'm not going to kill the Raptors for making this move. I think it's an ambitious one that if it ends up going well, then it's amazing. And if it ends up not going well, then you've kind of now you're just in a position that you were pretty much going to be in anyway, outside of something kind of crazy happening, like Siakam making a super drastic improvement, or maybe the same thing happening for OG or whatever, So that's all that. Let's talk about the team itself now. Starting five's looking pretty good, if you ask me. If all of this is assuming Kawhi Leonard is going to be a team player, be a model citizen, and even if he's going to leave in a year, at least care about this team in the moment. Like, give your 100% effort and all that, and be healthy and all that stuff. Then, look, Lowry, Danny Green, which is a hell of a throw-in. I know he's a little bit worse than he was a few years ago, but still, that's pretty good. Kawhi, Ibaka, and then Valanciunas. Some decent defense on this team now. And they were already a pretty damn good defensive team. But the jump from DeRozan to Kawhi on defense is just massive. Because DeRozan's okay, below average, sometimes terrible. And then Kawhi is Kawhi, right? Danny Green, good switchy defender. Maybe the best transition defender in the history of basketball. Only a little bit of an exaggeration there. And then Kyle Lowry is still pretty damn good, although his short stature does put some limitations on how good he can be, but he can definitely defend point guards and some two guards. And hell, some big guys in the post when he's really determined. And then Ibaka is at least average, maybe I would say above average with Ibaka. He's no longer the OKC guy who blocks 4 shots a game, but he knows what he's doing, and he's a decently sized dude who can still move around the floor relatively well. Pascal Siakam is getting better as a defender. I do think he's still a little too thin, but his instincts and quickness are definitely there. And then you got OG, who, based on his first season, could end up being one of the better perimeter defenders in the league, and between Danny Green, Kawhi, and OG, that's a lot of switchability, right? 3 guys who are at least 6'6", because I believe Danny Green is 6'6", who can defend a few positions, know what they're doing, and in the case of Kawhi and OG, are both pretty decently strong as well. OG was able to not get bulldozed by LeBron every single time he defended him, and that's pretty impressive stuff. And then depending on where Siakam is in his 3rd season defensively, he could really give you something. You could try some lineups with Ibaka at the 5 or Siakam at the 5. And then offensively, decent amount of shooting. Lowry, Kawhi is a way better outside shooter than DeRozan. Danny Green's still pretty damn good from out there. We'll see where OG is at. Siakam has been working on his outside jumper, but it's definitely not there right now. Ibaka is decent. You still have CJ Miles on the team for what it's worth. And then, of course, the bench lineup is still kind of there. Jakob Poeltl is now gone. But, Van Fleet, Miles, Siakam, a decent amount of those guys are still around. We should also include DeLon Wright, who defensively is also pretty solid as well. So this team's got some versatility. They got size. And they now have themselves one of the best players in the NBA. So, do I think they're the best team in the East? If you force me to pick, I still think the Celtics are better just because they have so much versatility and all that. But as a Celtics fan, I am very scared of Kawhi Leonard because he is better than anybody on the Celtics. And he could also lock up anybody on the Celtics. So that's frightening stuff. Now, Brad Stevens' offense makes it to where it's tougher to just stay glued to a guy, but hey, Kawhi's Kawhi, right? Also, I think Lowry has actually become underrated at this point. Just because, like, again, dude was pretty damn good in that round 2 against the Cavs. He put up like 18 and 9 on really good percentages, and he did a similar thing against the Wizards in round 1. So, yeah. Hey, you know, it's really difficult to get yourself a legit superstar, and now the Raptors got him, so I get the risk. I do. Because again, if they don't make this move, then I think you're looking at a really boring basketball team, in the sense of if you fast forwarded like 1 year, then you're looking at a team that is still swamped with salary, Kyle Lowry getting older by the day, and the Raptors don't really have a history of like maintaining older players, which is going to be something that I mentioned in the Spurs video later. And then you'd have like 30-year-old Demar Derozan and these young dudes, you know, they're good, but again, I'm not like going super crazy over them. I think they can be like great role players. Hey, you know, might as well swing for the fences, that's what I say.